101.
I am alone. I'm sat in a hotel room in a town I don't recognize. I'm done running. You can't outrun a shadow. Never be alone. I wish I'd read those words earlier. It's too late now. They've latched onto me. The whispers are getting louder. All I have left is my story and my grandfather's final warning. I discovered his body first. I can still remember the putrid smell emanating from behind the basement door, the terror slowly trickling into my veins as I descended into the darkness. My parents were still tirelessly searching upstairs, but I didn't have the heart to call out to them. I knew what was down there. When the light flickered on, my blood turned to ice. At first, I could only see his feet, hovering motionlessly above a toppled chair. As I traced my eyes upwards, I saw everything at once. Mangled skin trapped in a scraggly noose, a murky shadow cast by the dangling light, the pale look of revulsion still etched onto his face. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything other than stay, but I couldn't. Time froze me to the spot, and I watched in horror. It was my fault. No one said it, but it was what they were all thinking. Hidden behind the meaningless platitudes we received from what distant friends my grandfather had left was air of anger and disappointment. You see, my grandfather was not a good man. He wasn't callous or cruel, but bitter and difficult to handle. He hadn't always been like that. But after the death of his wife, long before I was born, he deteriorated quickly into the man I knew. My mom claims that he blamed himself for his wife's death. She'd deteriorated into depression after accidentally running over a young boy in the road. Her heart attack could never be explained by doctors. Her life simply ended, and it drove my grandfather to become the person I knew. By the time I began to form cogent memories of him, he was already at his worst, combative, impatient, even deceitful on occasion. He was not a pleasant person to be around. I was a challenging child, and he never fully learned how to cope with me. My earliest memories of him mostly involve his seemingly endless tirades that followed whenever I upset him, which was a lot. He remained the same as I grew older, and eventually I reached the age where my mother felt no obligation to force me to see him anymore. She gave me a choice, and I chose to ignore him. It sounds harsh, even cruel, but he never made the effort to reach out to me. In the last 6 years, I've only spoken to him once. It was in April this year. A quiet, unremarkable morning as far as I remember it. The phone call only lasted a minute. I wasn't willing to give him the time to explain why he treated me like dirt when I was younger. I don't remember it word for word, but he sounded apologetic, and as if he were crying behind the outward coldness he always displayed. He pleaded with me to visit him, but something about it just felt off. It was as if he was begging, and not in the sense that he was desperate to reconcile our differences. I remember telling him that he would have to make amends with my parents before I could even consider seeing him, and then hanging up abruptly. I never received another call. He never rang my parents either, perhaps simply out of fear for their response, or he just assumed they wouldn't listen. It wasn't until late July that we discovered his body. We'd received a phone call from a neighbor of his that we remained friends with, warning us that he had not been seen exiting his house in over 3 weeks, and that his usually well-kept garden had become unusually unkempt. My mom reluctantly decided to visit him, just to ensure he was alive. She hasn't been the same since. None of us have. A shadow has loomed over our family for the last 6 months. My dad has resurrected his old drinking habits, and my mom has sunk into depression. At first, I thought it was just the grief and guilt overwhelming them, but now I think it's something more. It happened to me as well. It started with needless arguments I would have with my girlfriend that eventually drove us to break up. I was so upset that I isolated myself from my friends, finding no comfort in any form of social contact. It took a month of this solitude for me to realize that something was off. I've always been a sprightly person, feeling an endless and unfulfillable need to be productive in every second I spend awake. Recently, I felt that even leaving my apartment is too much to handle. I've lost my job, my friends. I haven't spoken to my parents in weeks, but I've got a feeling that they are in the exact same position I am. It's like there's something weighing me down, something keeping me alone. Curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know why my grandfather killed himself. I thought that maybe if I discovered the reason, I might be able to move on. So I returned to the house. Despite his seeming lack of interest in my life, he'd left it to me in his will. I began searching everywhere. The police had already looked around, but it's unlikely that they've looked extensively. Given the nature of his death, they didn't have much doubt that it was suicide. I found a letter in the room I used to stay in as a child. I don't have much time now. The whispers are starting to make sense. I'll transcribe the letter as quickly as I can. Dearest Andrew, though it pains me that my last words to you must be written, I no longer have the time to convince you to speak with me. I have alienated everyone I know, and in doing so, a shadow has grown upon my heart. I am being followed. Every moment of my life is now consumed with fear. They are everywhere, Andrew, and they do not stop. It's the curse of our family. Your grandmother was consumed by it. She even told me, and I didn't believe her. I caused her death, and I have lived with my mistake for the last 20 years of my life. Now I must warn you, for I fear you may fall under the same curse. It starts with the whispers. They're too quiet to hear at first, but they soon start to make sense. Then come the shadows. The darkness of my house has grown. Even during day, when light shines through the windows, the room is still dark. You can't escape them, no matter how far you go. I try to run, but the shadows followed me. No one else can see them, only me. No one will believe me, nor will they you should they latch onto you. The only thing that stops them is others. Surround yourself with others, Andrew. It keeps the shadows at bay. They like loneliness. That's how they got my Andrea. I left her alone too often. For me, it is now too late. I can only summon the motivation to write you this letter. The whispers make sense now. The shadows are moving in. I will not let them take me. Not like they took my Andrea. Give my love to my daughter and my son-in-law. I hope they can forgive me. Never be alone, Andrew. Never be alone. That's the end of the letter. I don't have much time. The whispers, they're starting to make sense. I don't think I can kill myself. I'm not brave enough. They're getting louder. I can hear them behind me. The room is too dark. Why are they repeating the same word? They're wrong. They're wrong. I didn't let him die. I am not a murderer. Number 2. I like to take a moment out of my day to just sit on the toilet and relax. Not like most people, I guess. I never bring my phone or anything. I just need that breathing space where nothing is happening and there's no input. The shitter is the only place where there are zero odds of someone bothering me about something, so I'll take what I can get. The restrooms at my school are pretty good for being left alone, They're not stalls, they're full closed off rooms with sinks and a mirror on the back wall. They do have one downside, that after about 10 minutes of no activity in the hallway, the sensors will turn off all the lights. There's no sensors inside the rooms. I know, genius. So you have to get out to activate them. I often sit there meditating for so long that the lights go out. I've done it too many times to count. I don't really mind it. I know the routine by now. Get up, the door is arm's length away, unlock it, stick an arm out, and wave it around. The lights come back on. I can do it with my pants around my ankles, no problem, if it's that kind of a situation. Today, I didn't have to though. I was done when it happened, so I just stood up in the darkness and zipped my pants. The restrooms are in the middle of the building, and both the outer and the inner doors close tight to the floor, so when it's dark here, it's fucking dark. Like you can wave your hand an inch from your face and see no movement. If you've never tried it, I would actually like to recommend that you find a place like that. It's really trippy. Your brain isn't used to that. In any event, I reached out for the door right in front of me, but today something was different. I couldn't reach it. I took a step forward with my arms stretched out, but it just wasn't there. Already then, I started to panic. This was not making any fucking sense. I know it doesn't sound like much, but there was no fucking way the door was that far away. I've done this 100 times. Right now, I should be literally standing with my elbow in the middle of the door, and there was nothing, just an empty fucking space. I just stood there frozen for a moment, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe the door had opened somehow, and I was just standing in the doorway? That just terrified me more, thinking about who opened the door and why I didn't hear them. But I tried feeling for the frame of the door anyway. I reached out to the other side, and again I felt nothing, just empty space. This is doubly impossible, because the walls are so close together I can easily reach them both at once. I did a twirl back and forth, swinging 360 degrees around me, but I hit nothing. At this point, I was damn near ready to run and scream for help, but the rational part of my brain kept telling me I was still in a small room, and if I ran I would just smash my face first into the door, and if I screamed I would be a laughingstock for getting lost in the fucking restroom and having to be rescued. I did the only thing I could think of and continued walking forwards, with my arms outstretched. I think I took about 5 or 6 steps before I stopped again, trying desperately to figure out how to get out of this. I felt like I had left reality. I was on the verge of tears. I don't know where I got the idea, but suddenly I crouched down to feel the floor. It was the only thing tangible still, so I guess it made sense. Still the same cold, rough tile floor of the restroom. For some reason, that made me calm down a bit, like I hadn't gone completely. Then something else happened that I can't really explain. I don't think your hearing gets better in the dark, you just notice sounds better. And now it was quiet as ever. But the silence changed somehow, like just the sound of my breath, the way it echoed. It was like the room vanished. Until now, it felt normal, but now the echo was gone, and it was like I was standing in the middle of a pitch black desert with nothing around me for miles on either side. I can't remember what I did for the next bit of time. I think I just kept standing still for a while. I think I tried making peace with God at some point, and I'm not even religious. I suddenly got this strong feeling that there was someone behind me. You know how it usually feels, but it was different. I also knew that if I could turn around and see, I'd just see my reflection. In that moment, I just sort of knew that the mirror on the back wall was still right behind me. It had never left when I walked away. It sent a shiver down my spine. I turned around slowly and reached out to touch it. I felt it, cold and smooth, still right there. Even though I couldn't see it, I could visualize my reflection in front of me, standing right there at the end of my fingertips. It felt surreal to know my own image was right in front of me and I couldn't see it. Just like that, it was over. I heard the familiar sound behind me of the outer door to the hallway opening and someone walked in. The sensors picked him up and light returned to my stall and I could see my reflection. My heart was still pounding and I halfway expected my reflection to be the girl from The Ring looking back at me, but it was just my stupid face. I looked around and nothing was changed. The room was the same, my business was still in the can and everything. Needless to say, I flushed and fucking bolted out of there. I'm pretty sure I forgot to wash my hands. I don't know what to do now. I've never believed in anything supernatural, but what happened in there was impossible. All you people out there with your experiences, what do you do after the haunting stops or whatever? Do you just get back to work, pretending nothing's up? That just doesn't seem good enough to me. I need to know what happened. I know it wasn't the most impressive encounter with the supernatural to have, but it still scared me shitless. No pun intended. I've been thinking about it. Even though the mirror followed behind me, I don't think it was the evil part. I think the mirror was my anchor, if that makes sense. I think it was the only reason why I ever got out of there, and I could still be wandering that darkness if I hadn't touched it. The worst part is, I feel like I've lost the only place I could relax and take a break.